This morning's Old Testament scripture is from the book of Habakkuk. We don't get to say that very often, but Habakkuk. And our readings are from chapters 1 and 2. First, from chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, the oracle that the prophet Habakkuk saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not listen? Or cry to you violence, and you will not save? Why do you make me see wrongdoing and look at trouble? Destruction and violence are before me, strife and contention arise, so the law becomes slack, and justice never prevails. The wicked surround the righteous, therefore judgment comes forth perverted. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, I shall stand at my watchpost and station myself on the rampart. I will keep watch to see that he will say to me, and what he will answer concerning my complaint. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision, make it plain on tablets so that a runner may read it. For there is still a vision for the appointed time. It speaks of the end and does not lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come, it will not delay. Look at the proud, their spirit is not right in them, but the righteous live by their faith.
The next scripture reading comes from Luke's Gospel, chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through town. A man there named Zacchaeus, a ruler among tax collectors, was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he couldn't because of the crowd. And so he ran ahead and climbed up a sycamore tree so he could see Jesus, who was about to pass that way. When Jesus came to that spot, he looked up and said, Zacchaeus, come down at once. I must stay in your home today. So Zacchaeus came down at once, happy to welcome Jesus. Everyone who saw this grumbled, saying, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, look, Lord, I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anyone, I repay them 4 times as much. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this household, because he too is a son of Abraham. Jesus came to seek and save the lost. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So we're trying something new. We've tried it a few weeks now. I've got my phone number up there. If you have any kind of questions or thoughts during the sermon, feel free to write my number down or send me a text message if it's a question, and we'll have a little conversation following the message, provided the question's appropriate, of course. Always got to throw that clause out there, or pertinent to tie up in a few minutes. So that's my number. And how often does a pastor tell you it's okay to text during the sermon? But today, it's okay if you want to try that. So here we go. Man, it was such a hot and sweltering day. The sun was at its worst height at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and there was no shade to be had, save for one little sycamore tree off in the distance. The humidity was low, of course, because this is primarily a desert area. Yet that did not stop the crowd from gathering in anticipation. There were a great deal of murmurs and questions and concerns that rang throughout the crowd. Everyone gathered in anticipation of seeing the walking legend himself. No, not Elvis Presley, but Jesus Christ. The one that had given sight to the blind, healed the sick, and brazenly forgiven the sins of others that had solely been reserved for the high priest before this. Everyone was itching to see who this Jesus fellow was. And they were curious as to what he looked like and how he might act or carry himself, especially around their own hometown. So many of them wondered if they would be the recipients of his special attention. Now, one of the savvy members of the crowd, a man by the name of Zacchaeus, a local tax collector and a part-time thief, was not liked by many people. He did, however, showcase his ingenuity from time to time, albeit in mostly nefarious ways. Nonetheless, he was very self-conscious regarding his height, as little Zacchaeus decided to try and do something about that shortcoming this time, though. He refused to let his shortness dictate his ability to see the coming Messiah, the Prince of Peace, the forgiver of sins. So he saw a tree not too far off in the distance calling his name. He thought that he could get a great vantage point from sitting up in that sycamore tree. Fortunately, he was an adept climber, which is one of the few perks he realized with his vertical challenges. He finally snuck and kind of meandered his way through the crowd, much to the notice of absolutely no one. He eventually found himself at the base of this sycamore tree and proudly knew that he would be able to scale it in a matter of minutes to a spot that would entitle him to the best seat in the streets. So as he began climbing the tree, he reached the top branch in 3 minutes flat. When he made himself comfortable on that upper branch, he leaned his back up against the trunk and stretched his legs out across the branch so they just kind of dangled there as he enjoyed the shade. Then he reached into his pocket and took out a small satchel of pistachios to pass the time and satiate his hunger. So right before he finished this little patch of pistachios, the murmurs of the crowd slowly began to grow to a dull roar. It was him, Jesus Christ, the Son of God. He was quickly approaching and struggled to make his way through the crowd as they continued to surround him as if they were starting a mosh pit at a rock concert. So the oddest thing began to happen. You see, as Zacchaeus was intently watching, he could clearly see Jesus in the middle of the crowd that was ballooning rather quickly. He stood out like a sore thumb. And from his perspective up in that tree, it was easy to find him and spot him and know that that was, in fact, Jesus Christ. Well, as he found Christ in the crowd, he looked up towards his face, and at the same time, Jesus did the same thing, and they made eye contact. At which point, Zacchaeus kind of just froze. He felt as if Jesus was looking into his very soul. As they maintained that eye contact, Jesus made a beeline for Zacchaeus in that tree, as if that was his sole purpose for being in the town that day. So as he arrived, he yelled at Zacchaeus to come on down, and he had a lot to say, and he wanted to go to his house to have a conversation. And the rest, they say, was history. And now I imagine this encounter and interaction with Zacchaeus was very intentional on the part of Jesus. And it has the potential to teach us many different lessons for today. So the story of Zacchaeus has many different meanings and implications, not only for that current context, but also for us today here in the contemporary context of 2019. There are, however, 3 primary assets and functions I'd like to hone in on, courtesy once again of Pastor Jill Duffield, who writes for the Presbyterian Outlook and sends these weekly emails regarding the lectionary. She describes Zacchaeus' encounter with Jesus through 3 specific adjectives. She says public, obvious, and communal. So to me, these great adjectives are theologically rich and deep, and they can be used not only for the story, but also can apply to our own faith as Christians and our own functions in the life of the church and what we should be doing and what God might be calling us to do and how to live our life. So first, let us begin with the first adjective offered, public. You see, nothing about this encounter and conversation with Jesus was private. It was all done in a public place. It took place outside, in front of the masses that had gathered around Jesus. Jesus was not shying away from what he was doing or what his intentions were or might be. But had he wanted to, Jesus probably could have just sent a disciple over to Zacchaeus and say, hey, go get that guy down out of that tree. We need to have a little conversation. So Andrew, go on over there and call him down and see what we can do. But that's not what Jesus did. He made a very intentional walk towards that tree himself. And so instead of having a disciple go and having a little more discreet and a little more subtle, he did this action in front of the whole crowd. So that being said, our Christianity, I feel, should also embody that public adjective. We should not be afraid to display it out in the open at stores or restaurants or even maybe riding in elevators with strangers. Now, does this mean we have to carry around a giant neon sign that points to us and says, I'm a Christian? Or wear a giant sombrero that says, I love Jesus all the time? No, not necessarily. But it does mean that we have to live our faith outwardly. We need to embody it publicly. We need to make sure that others are able to see us and hopefully instantly associate us as followers of Jesus Christ. And not only that, but we should be bold enough to display acts of love and kindness and compassion and to enjoy experiencing happiness and joy with one another in front of other people. We shouldn't be ashamed of being Christian and our devotion to God and Jesus Christ. We shouldn't feel uncomfortable around others with our faith that we feel we need or should have or that we have to hide it in life. Instead, we need to find a way to be proud of who we are, who God has made us to be, and who God has called us to be in life. So Christ's own actions reflect this in his ministry, right? Christ didn't set up some little hut and just say, hey, if you need anything, just come talk to me, right? No, he walked around and went around to a bunch of different places. And Christ's ministry was very public. And I feel our faith and our devotion to Christ should also be seen in the public eye. So this is precisely how Jesus engaged with Zacchaeus, in a very public forum, at least starting out. The next adjective is obvious. Well, it's not obvious. The actual word is obvious, just for those keeping score at home. So this relates to the knowledge that everybody knows or should know. You see, the town knew who Zacchaeus was. A rich tax collector that cheated people out of their money. And they knew who Jesus was, a prophet, a healer, a storyteller, and the Son of God. So people knew the obvious. And that plays a key role in today's story too. Others knew who the people were and the players that were present in the story. They knew redemption and potential forgiveness for Zacchaeus could come from his own actions and the changing of his own ways, but that had to come from him. The less obvious witness was how Christ would interact with or react with little wee Zacchaeus. You heard the grumbles in the crowd. Oh, he's going to a house of a sinner. Why is he paying attention to that guy? What is he doing? They didn't understand that part, but they knew obviously who Zacchaeus was. And so the obvious way was in the way that Christ responded to him. They saw him go to his house. And then from there, Zacchaeus more or less did the rest of the work himself. He made it very clear to others and to Jesus that he was going to make up for his cheating transgressions. He would give half his possessions to the poor, then repay what he stole 4 times that which he had stolen. And then from there, Jesus went on to tell everyone around them that today salvation has come to the household because he too is a son of Abraham, and how Christ came to seek and save the lost. Now, that was his purpose, of which he was fulfilling in this small little encounter with the city's crooked tax collector. So to me, this kind of harkens back to one of my favorite hymns. They will know we are Christians by our love. You see, it should be obvious to others that we are, in fact, Christian. Sure, we won't have those neon signs or those giant Christ-loving sombreros, but we will have many opportunities to display and convey God's love to the rest of the world. So when those moments arrive, the hope is that we will act accordingly. That the other people can see what we do and how we react and how we intentionally enter into a situation or what we might say. And hopefully they'll respond, but based on their reaction, I would think that they're a Christian. So to me, that's obvious. I can see the love that they have. I can see the forgiveness that they embody. I can see the way that they carry themselves. Their love for their others and their neighbors seems to run really deep in their soul. Now, the third and final adjective is communal. Now, if there's one thing that truly encapsulates this encounter with Zacchaeus and Jesus, and also sums up the Christian faith, is that we should be communal, right? We should do everything together as a church family, and that is what God is calling us to do and how God is calling us to live. And this interaction wasn't just between Zacchaeus and Jesus or 2 people. It involved the whole town. People saw Jesus go to the tree and call him down. People saw Jesus go to his house and hear him offer that forgiveness and salvation that had now come to Zacchaeus. Now think about it. Zacchaeus, granted, could not have stolen from others if he lived alone. But he also could not find generosity. He couldn't find forgiveness, and he couldn't find redemption if it did not involve the entire community with his reparations. So the lesson for us is this: we cannot privatize our faith. We can't worship alone, and we can't live our Christian faith alone. We can't take communion alone, and we can't be baptized alone. All of those are earmarks of the Christian faith that necessitate a community being present and supportive for all of those around us. So it will take a church family or a church community in which we belong to be active and to live out our faith. It involves people both inside our church walls and outside our church walls. It involves both members and non-members alike. It involves people that we love dearly and people that we really struggle to see some positives sometimes too. And that's at the heart of Jesus' message for the village, for Zacchaeus and for us. So we need to realize what just is at stake with these three adjectives. For one, they encourage us. And they encourage us to look beyond ourselves to places that are public, places that are obvious, and places that are communal in nature. They remind us that we are not alone, nor do we have to go through this life alone. We have help, and we shouldn't be afraid to ask for it or to seek it out if we truly need it. We have to live this life that covers these three adjectives that are named here today, ones that Christ initiated and ones that he carried out throughout the entirety of his ministry. Most things that Christ did were in public settings. There were a few times where he went in private to be alone or had a Lord's Supper with his disciples, but a lot of it was public in nature. A lot of it was obvious what he was trying to do. And most of it was communal or part of a community. So we should gauge whether or not what we are doing as individuals and as a church falls under the category of these three adjectives. Is it public? Is it obvious? Is it communal? Does the community around us feel our presence? Are we making an impact in the world, or are we just keeping everything we say and do in private, behind closed doors? Are we allowing our love and our commitment to God to spill over into the community in which we live and to the family in which we belong? Or are we a little more guarded and protective of that? Our discipleship to Christ should be obvious to others. No, not necessarily in the format that we have to wear a clergy collar or wear some kind of outward indication that we are Christians. But our actions and our way of living and our words should be reflective of who we are and who we devote our lives to. So living that life, it should be public for us. It should be obvious to others. And at its very heart, it has to be communal. And that's what God is calling us to do. That's how God is calling us to live. So we need to listen to that calling and follow it and devote our lives and our love to Jesus Christ in many public, obvious, and communal ways. Amen.